Hello, my name is Darren Woodfork, and I'm an attorney here in Scottsdale, Arizona. And here at my firm, I specialize in restoring Arizona citizens' gun rights, and I also specialize in sealing old criminal cases here. And we also do personal injury work in the form of car accidents, things like that. Today, I'm going to be talking about 4 or 5 specific crimes here in Arizona, specific convictions on which how they play on whether or not you can get your gun rights back here in Arizona. As you probably know, we have a couple statutes here in Arizona where they allow you to restore your gun rights if you've been convicted of a felony. If you've been convicted of a felony in Arizona, you lose your civil rights. You lose your right to serve on a jury, to vote, to hold elective office, and to carry a firearm. But there is a method to restore those rights. And so today I'm going to be talking about some of the cases where you'll be eligible to restore your rights and some of the cases you will not be eligible. If you have any questions, please contact my firm. You can email me at Darren W. That's DERRONW at MSN.com. Or you can check out my website. I got tons of information on restoring your rights on my website, which is woodforklaw.com. That's WOODFORKLAW.com. So let's get into it today. The first thing I want to talk about is the cases where you will never be, well, not never, you can't get your rights restored in Arizona, your gun rights restored in Arizona if you've been convicted of these particular crimes. And in the statute explicitly, they say that you cannot get your gun rights back if you've been convicted of a dangerous offense. And so usually a dangerous offense is something that you had the conviction and the state alleged it was dangerous and it involved a weapon or serious injuries or serious violence, something like that. Usually those are the cases that are alleged and convicted as dangerous cases. Most of the time you've done a lot of prison time on a dangerous offense. You don't get probation on a dangerous offense. And so if you did a lot of time and there was a weapon involved and there's violence and things like that, you will not be able to get your gun rights restored here in Arizona. The next kind of level down from that is what's called serious offenses in Arizona. And those are the same type of crimes that involve a weapon or serious injuries or violence or things like that, but they're not designated dangerous in the conviction. So a lot of times people get charged with a dangerous offense and then maybe take a plea bargain for a lesser, which drops that dangerous allegations. And so then you have the conviction that's non-dangerous, but it's still like a serious case. And so what the statute says for those type of cases is that you have to wait 10 years from the date of conviction, or really the day that you get done paying your fines and restitution and fees and all that stuff. From the day of that, you have to wait 10 years before you can file a motion to restore your gun rights if you've been convicted of what's called a serious offense. Now, again, I've talked about this a lot on this channel in that I've been filing these motions for 25 years here in Arizona, and there's a difference between kind of what you're qualified to file and what the judges will grant. And so, if you've been convicted of a serious case, under the law, you may be able to file, a motion to restore your gun rights, but the judges have 100% discretion. And so if at the 11th year or 12th year you file a motion, the judge could very well deny it just based on their discretion, even though you qualify under the statute. So that's something to keep in mind on these cases and all the cases really where you file a motion, that the judges have 100% discretion. And that's why, like I said, that's one of the reasons why you hire a lawyer to help you, is because we kind of know what the judges are going to do, like in real life, not just a matter of what's on the law. But anyway, so that's that. And then, so those are the two cases, like I said, you really have to be worried about. Again, same to say, the serious cases, you've also probably did jail time for that or prison time. Those are not cases that you usually get probation for. And so those will determine whether or not you get your rights back here in Arizona. The next group, and I probably should have started it with this first, is that these are the cases where you'll never get your gun rights back no matter what. And that's cases that are involved with kids and sex offenses and things like that, what they call dangerous crimes against children. Again, same thing. If you're charged with something like that, you did a lot of prison time. You have a lot of like sex offender, prohibitions on your record. If that's your conviction, you'll never be able to restore your gun rights here in Arizona. Even if somehow there's one charge, but then it was like dropped down to something else, like maybe an attempt or a lesser or something like that. Even with that said, again, going back to the judges with their discretion, if they see something like that in your file and they see that you were charged with that, but you pled guilty to a lesser, and it involved sex crimes or kids or anything like that, the judge will just deny it. So you will never get your gun rights back here in Arizona if you've been convicted of a case like that. Also, and maybe not as serious or not as certain, is cases, or maybe a little bit surprising, I should say. Let me put it that way. Even though you have a case like where there might be just like a misdemeanor sex offense case, maybe like a disorderly conduct or like flashing or some of those, those cases that can be dropped down to even like a class 6 open or a misdemeanor case, something like that. Even those cases, if they're designated like a sex offense and you have to register like as a low level, if that's in your history, the judge will just deny the motion to restore your gun rights here in Arizona. That's my experience anyway. So if there's any kind of case like that, you won't be able to get your gun rights restored here. I know I get a lot of comments on this channel about the gun rights can't be taken away because of the Constitution and because of the founders and all that, but those comments are completely wrong. You will absolutely lose your rights to carry a gun if you've been convicted of, dangerous crimes against children or some violent case like that. And then if you, get out of prison, then you go and buy a gun or somehow get a hold of a gun and you're picked up with a gun, you'll go right back to prison as a prohibited possessor. I don't care what people think, all the gun advocates or the Second Amendment people who say that the judges should go to jail for taking people's gun rights away. Those people are just going to get people in trouble because, again, if you get picked up as a prohibited possessor, you will go straight to prison. And that's both state and federal. I mean, that's, the federal law too. It's like they'll just take you to prison for being a convicted criminal or convicted felon with in possession of a gun. And so, again, I thought that was common knowledge, but according to my comments on this channel, it seems like some people are sadly mistaken. But nevertheless, so those are the cases, like I say, you'll never get your gun rights back. Once they're gone, they're gone. Now I'll kind of get into some of the cases where you can get your gun rights back. And that's 80%, 90% of the cases out there. Most people didn't commit a crime where they had to do a ton of time in prison. Most people did a crime, one time they got probation and they've never been in trouble with the law since. And that's kind of what all these like second chance laws are for, that one mistake basically. And so the first type of case I'll talk about is assault cases. If you've been charged with an old case of assault or aggravated assault, something like that, whether that was like a bar fight or if that was some type of ag assault charge connected to a resisting arrest case when you're dealing with the police, those are charged with ag assault. Sometimes also if there's like a altercation with a healthcare worker or people like that, they charge that as ag assault also. So anyways, if you have one of those ag assault cases, then you can file a motion to restore your gun rights for sure if it's been enough time. If it's been like the class 4 felony, 5 felony, 6 felony, if it's been 5 years since then, if it's been 5 years, you can file a motion. Again, just make sure you have all your fines and restitution, all that stuff paid off. And, I would say at least half the time, if not a little bit more than half the time, the judge will grant a motion if there's been an old assault case, assuming it's not real there's nothing aggravating about the case. There's no crazy facts about what happened. Just remember that. And that's what I always, that's what we always ask at our consultation. We find out if there's any weapons involved in the old offense, even if it was dropped down to like a 6 open or a misdemeanor or something like that. You have to be aware of what the judge is going to be looking at when they look at your old file. So that's, again, like I said, assault cases. Those are cases where, about more than 50% of the time the judge will grant it. The next case where it's probably the judge grants about 80% of the time is theft cases. If you have an old theft case, like a car theft or some type of embezzlement, maybe some type of fraud, maybe. Those cases, you can get your gun rights back here in Arizona. I've had probably 90% success rate with those type of cases. And it's interesting because, like I mentioned on one of these videos, and I'll put it in the card here if I remember, the judges don't have a problem restoring gun rights when it comes to crimes of what they call moral turpitude. And that's like lying, that's embezzlement, that's stealing, that's fraud, those type of things. The judges don't have a problem with restoring your rights if you've been convicted of something like that. They have a big problem if you're convicted of something with violence and weapons. That's the other end of the spectrum, basically. But no, if you wrote bad checks or something, or you stole a car or something like that, the judges will usually restore your gun rights about 90% of the time. And I mentioned in one of the videos on here, I said, I thought that it was kind of interesting, after doing this for so long, and watching the judges, how they feel about theft type cases and how they'll easily grant your gun rights back. I thought it was interesting because when you're applying to be a lawyer here in Arizona, and I assume anywhere else in the country, you have to do what's called a character and fitness exam, and they basically look through your whole past, your whole history, whatever, and they find out basically if there's any instance of what they call moral turpitude, if you've stolen anything, if you've embezzled anything, if you lied about anything, things like that. And if they find something like that, or when they do see that, you will not get your bar license. They will not admit you to the Arizona bar, because one of the things that's will prohibit you from becoming a lawyer here in Arizona is if there's a case of moral turpitude, if that, the stealing, things like that. Ironically, it's the Arizona bar will allow you to become a lawyer if you have violence in your past. If there's like violence, or if there's like a gun crime or something like that. Within reason. But with violence, they don't care. They just care if you lie. And so that's when you become a lawyer. I just thought that was interesting, how the courts look at that versus the bar licensing here in Arizona. But anyways, if you have an old theft case, you'll probably get your gun rights back if you file the motion. The next case is drug cases. Drug cases are another case where the judges will grant your motion to restore about 90% of the time. Again, if nothing's crazy about the old case, the judges have no problem with drug cases. They will file, in my experience anyway, they'll file it. There's probably like the easiest case that I have when I have old drug cases. And I mean like real drug cases too, not just like possession cases, talking about manufacturing cases, transportation cases. I've had a bunch of cases, not a bunch of cases, but I've had a handful of cases where, large quantity of drugs, scales, ledgers, all that stuff for sales, stuff like that. And the judge granted the motion to restore gun rights on those drug cases. So judges don't really care about drug cases. It's not really a big deal. Relatively speaking. I guess probably because they see the rehabilitation nature of drug cases. A lot of times if you're picked up on a drug case, you don't even go to jail. You do, back in the day, they had what's called Prop 22, I think it was, Prop 200, I think it was, where they didn't send drug offenses to jail, they sent them to probation and treatment. And so the judges kind of know that drugs are kind of a case of rehabilitation and treatment, not punishment in jail. And that's why they restore gun rights so frequently when I file them. I think it's also one thing I'll point out though is that even though it is like the rehabilitation aspect of it, and they think that you can come back from a drug addiction, things like that, the judges often will deny motions if there's involving any type of mental health issues. There's a separate part of the statute here in Arizona. It's a separate part of the law that deals with mental health. If you had to go to like the mental health hospital, things like that. After that, if you try to file a motion to get your gun rights back, normally those cases are denied, at least in my experience, when it comes to that. So there's not the same type of rehabilitation notation as there is with drugs, as there is with mental health. But anyways, if you've been convicted of a drug case back in the day, you have a really good chance of getting your motion granted when you file a motion to restore your rights. The next case I'll talk about is one of the more complicated cases here, and that's the domestic violence notations in convictions here in Arizona. Now, you might know if there's like an assault case or, usually an assault case, there might be what's called a domestic violence allegation in that assault case. And you might have heard something called the Lautenberg Act, I think it's called. It's a federal law, but basically says that if you've been convicted of a domestic violence charge, no matter what it is, it could be just like a misdemeanor domestic violence charge, that you lose your gun rights under the federal law. And that if you'll be a prohibited possessor if you've had that domestic violence charge. Now, I'll tell you, again, in my experience, that in the federal law, it basically has a notation, or it has a section basically where they're talking about what will happen if you've had your state case, your motions to restore in your state case, and how that affects it. And it's a little unclear on if there's a complete prohibition if you've had your old case, your state case, restored, and the reason why I say that, because the law says that, but I filed at least 10 or 15 cases where there was a domestic violence notation. The Arizona judge granted the motion to restore rights in that case, and then my client went out and purchased a gun and was allowed to purchase a gun. So again, that just shows that you can purchase, or at least I've had experience where my clients have been able to purchase a gun after a domestic violence conviction, even though there is that federal law out there. That's something to think about. I mean, and also it goes back to the judges have discretion, and depending on what the assault case is, about, or what it's like. The judge may deny it, from the beginning. But if you get it granted, you may not have to worry about that federal statute. And so that's that. So finally, and I'll leave you with this. The question I get quite a bit is, can you still file a motion to get your firearm rights back, your gun rights back, if you have more than one felony? And the short answer is yes, you can. And in the law, there's no prohibition between filing if you have multiple felonies that you can't file. You absolutely can file. And I think if you look at the first video I have on my channel here, we had a kid who had 4 felonies, and we were able to get his rights restored in all 4 felonies. I talked about how, I told him when he called me and he said he had 4 felonies and he wanted to get his rights restored. I told him that, the chances are less likely, but he said he didn't care. He wanted to try anyway, and we did, and he was successful. Now, that is the exception to the rule. Normally, if you have more than 2 cases, the chances of you getting your rights restored are less likely. One, because the judge has to grant the motion to restore your gun rights back in each one of the cases, in each different case number. If they're in different courts, you have to file in each court, basically. And so getting, kind of running the table is hard when it comes to filing those motions. And then also there's a it's cost prohibitive. I mean, if you have multiple cases, if you're filing a motion to restore your gun rights here in Arizona, the average price is going to be, the retainer for a lawyer is going to be $1,500 to, probably $2,500. Currently, my firm charges $1,750, and so you can see how if you have more than one case, how that can add up, because you're paying fees for each case. And so if you were to have like 4 cases, you know, that's what, $5,000 or something like that. Again, there's a it gets cost prohibitive if you have more than 4 cases. Under the law, though, it doesn't matter. Under the law, you can try as much as you want. And then also, like I said, if you have 4 cases, it's going to be less likely, and you're probably wasting all that money that you pay to get them filed. So there's like a practical, real life, consideration here. So, anyways, but you can, and that's multiple cases right there. So, if you do have multiple cases, get in touch with my firm. I'll let you know if I think you have a chance of getting the judge to, grant your motion. Because like I said, I've been on both sides. I've had cases, like I said, I had a kid with 4 felony cases, and then I also had the other side where we had it denied in just 2 cases. So I've seen the whole spectrum. But anyway, so that's all I have today. Those are the specific crimes. If you're wondering if you can get your gun rights restored here in Arizona, those are the cases of, like I said, either dangerous cases. Cases involving dangerous crimes against kids, cases of assault, cases of theft, cases of drugs, and then multiple cases, and then the domestic violence notation also. Hopefully you found that helpful. If you have any questions, please get in touch with my firm. I'll have all my information down in the description. Please don't hesitate to email me, and I'll answer any questions that you have. So anyways, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and please like the video. Thanks. Bye.